Hey guys, so the purpose of this recording is to demonstrate using SnapCenter to help take a environment where there are two databases in the same disk group and use ASM and cloning technology to create a second disk group to split out the databases into that second disk group. Now, this is going to be a single pass recording, and I'm going to do my best to remove any dead air. But if it's kind of all over the place, I apologize for that. But as I said, this is going to be a single pass attempt. Okay, so if we look at the environment, we kind of walked through it the other day. I have a system, a Linux system with databases that are running in ASM. What I did in order to test this and vet out this environment is I created a second database. So the other day we had ASM DB1. I created ASM DB2 and went ahead and put it in the same data disk group, right? So now I have two databases up and running ASM DB2, ASM DB1. They're all located in the database files. So the data files, temp, not redo, but undo is in ESM data. The control files and others are in another disk group, and we're not actually moving those files. So the goal of this process is to actually perform a clone with SnapCenter, take this disk group, clone it to a disk group of a name we decide, which contains the files of the database we're splitting out, and then bringing up the database that's being split out onto that new disk group. And so what I've done is I've outlined the steps for this process, and I'm going to provide you all this documentation. I'm actually going to walk through this whole process. So in this demo, we are actually the new name or the name of the new disk group that we're going to be leveraging is EA ASM Data 2, and it's going to hold database ASM DB2. So we're going to leave ASM DB1 in the existing disk group, and we're going to, as part of the cloning process, ASM DB2 is going to, data files are going to be in the EA ASM Data 2. Now, what is going to be odd or seem ironic is we're actually not going to be cloning ASM DB2 as part of this process. We're cloning ASM DB1, and it brings along DB2 as part of the process. And that's really what we want. We don't want, as part of the clone, we don't want anything to happen to DB2. No new control files, no nothing. We actually want it to live just as is as we perform the clone process. And what is going to be important is there's a point in time where we're going to be shutting down ASM DB2, performing a backup, performing a clone, and then renaming the data files and bringing up ASM DB2 in the new environment. So let's go ahead and start off. So step one, first of all, we have to choose the name of the new disk group. And in this demo, it said EA ASM Data 2. Then to make sure that we can do this extremely quickly, I've actually have SQL that I'm going to run that's going to generate the commands to rename the data files in the DB2 database. So we're going to actually, as Oracle, we're going to go want to run that as ASM DB2 is set for our environment. Okay, so here we go. So if I ls home Oracle, let's just do, I have a script that is build rename files script.sql. It simply just takes an argument of what I'm naming it, changing the name to. So SQL plus run the script and then the name of the destination table space. So I run that, and what we see, it just creates the commands that say alter database, rename file, this in the old location to the new location. And we're going to actually run the script after we perform the clone and move the database over. So now that the script's been created and we see it, this is all the script does. Okay, next we'll go back and see what's our next step. So we've generated the SQL. In SnapCenter, we're going to now define a basic protection policy for the database that's not being moved. Now that we're in the SnapCenter interface, you see we have both of those databases, DB1 and DB2. Neither of them have protection policies applied. I went ahead and created a protection policy called backup data that does nothing but perform a snapshot of the database data files for the database that it's backing up. So I'll click on that. We can look at it. It's not doing an archive log. It's just simply data. Backup scope is data. So next, what we need to do is we want to apply that policy to the SnapCenter to the database that we're going to be cloning. So the command is right here where we're actually applying the protection policy. I'll go ahead and run it. I'll pull it out. And see, add protect resource, ASM DB1, as I mentioned, we're cloning DB1, and policies backup data. So once we've defined the policy, then we can actually protect the resource, or what protect means back it up. But before we actually run the backup, we need to shut down DB2 because we want DB2 to be in a cold shutdown state before we move it and migrate it, rename it. Okay, so it's been protected successfully. We are going to go to the Oracle user and make sure I'm in the correct database. And we are, so we'll do a shutdown immediate. We want it to come down cleanly. And this always takes a couple seconds, right? And the goal of this is to have the environment down as little as possible. And so that's our goal. Okay, once that's complete, we're going to then go down and actually run a backup based off of this policy. All right. And instead of cutting and pasting from here, I do have the backup. All right, well, that's not working, so let's just go ahead and go grab it. And here's the backup command. And I'll explain the syntax when I run it. New backup, we're backing up ASM DB1. Remember, this is for the purpose of moving DB2. We're using the backup data policy, which just backs up and we're saying wait for completion. And once that is complete, because this is going to take probably the longest out of this and then the clone, we'll go back and look. We see after we do the backup, the next is to actually create a clone specification file. Now, I have to pick a arbitrary name for the clone that I'm creating of the first database, and I'm just calling it ASM DB4 as such. And as soon as the backup is run and completed, I'm going to go ahead and generate this new clone specification. So the backup is completed. We can even go into resources here, and it should show that we've successfully protected the environment, or the database, excuse me. Okay, so there he's so now we're going to create the new clone specification, and it's clone last backup because we want the last backup, and we are cloning off DB1. Now, the next step is we actually need to replace within this file the disk group name. So if we were to grep on the clone location of, let's see, of this new file that's created, we'll see that this is the actual disk group that it's using for the default location. Now, what we want to do is we're going to go ahead and change that to the new name. So let's go ahead and just do a global replace of that. And then we want to get the file name correct because this is from an older file name. And we'll go ahead and do home Oracle clone. So we're going to store it in the, let's see, I don't know if it's, make sure, nope. Okay, so that's where we're storing it. We're going to go ahead and, so we've done that. Now let's make sure that it appropriately replace the disk group name. Yep, so it's EA ASM Data 2 has been all the strings. So now when we run the clone, it's going to actually leverage that path. All right, so let's go ahead and run the clone command. See if I have it in my history. Let's see. So I have it here, so let's go ahead and use that. We're to use that clone that we just created. We're saying skip recovery, wait for completion. Control C. Why I always feel like necessary to say that. And hit enter. So what's happening now is we're actually cloning back to this local host, the ASMDB1. And as I mentioned, because ASMDB2 happens to be in the same disk group, it is coming along for the ride, yet nothing is happening to it. We're doing nothing to it. So that's the desire, right? We want it to be in the cold state, untouched. So all we need to do now is once this is over there and safe, we will do a go into the Oracle user, set the environment to DB2. We will take those commands we ran earlier to rename the data files, start up the database in mount mode, rename the data files, and then bring up the database, and it's done. It's moved over. At that point, it's then just simply cleaning things up, splitting the volume, and doing all the subsequent stuff that's required to clean up after the clone. But remember, the primary goal is to have the database be down as little time as possible. And the time that it's down really is going to be the time that it takes to perform the backup, the time that it takes to perform the clone, the time that it takes to go start up the database in mount mode, do the rename, and then run a startup. At that point, you're free to turn the environment over to the users again to use it, but there's the cleanup that will subsequently happen. The clone itself should not take very long, right? I would say just a couple of minutes. We're skipping recovery, so we're no recovery required. We're not putting any archives. So all that extra work that generally happens during a clone process is not occurring in this environment. So let's go look at what our next step is. As I mentioned, as soon as the clone is finished, we should have that new ASM disk group, and we could probably even go look at it. So there's Oracle, there's Grid. If we do an ASM LSDG, does it have, no, it's still in the process of creating. So as we see, EA ASM Data 2 is out there, and it has both databases in it. We should be getting close to the end of the cloning process. Let's go ahead and get the Oracle window, Oracle user window up, because we are going to want to start up the database now in mount mode, which we could have actually done already. Okay, so the clone's complete. We're going to do a startup mount. So remember, we cloned 1, 2 was the database we were actually migrating. If we see the databases are all in the old location, we are going to run the rename DB files script. And now we see that they're in the new location. And then we can do an alter database open. All right, so the database is up and running. So we're actually good now in the respect that both databases are up. Next step would be to split out this database. And we can do that one of two ways. We can either do it at the SCCLI, or we could jump into the SnapCenter interface. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the interface simply because I don't have the full syntax yet for the command line, which I will have later. We'll go ahead and we'll select this. This is the clone, and then we'll click Clone Split. Now, as soon as it's split, then we can manage removing, cleaning up the process. So resource name, and we'll go ahead and click Start to start the split. Now, be aware there will need to be some additional storage space, right? So if you're running tight, if you're very tight on available space in the aggregate where your data disk group is, this could actually put you over the top. So you need to make sure that there's sufficient space for this operation. Now the split is going to take some time, right? So we put the database mount mode, we've brought up the database, we've split the clone. Next up, it's waiting for the split to complete. At this point, right, when we start creating protection for the new database, we're going to want to remove the snapshot before we remove all the instances of that clone database. While this is happening, though, we're going to want to go and shut down the database that's not desired. And that is, if we did a ps-grep on pmon, we should see an ASM DB4, which we really don't want. That was just simply there to create the clone, instantiate the clone. So we'll go ahead and get rid of it. And we can do abort because we're not even using that database. We don't need anything from an ASM DB4 perspective. We're going to want to remove it from Aura tab. So we've cleaned up the entries. There is going to be still the diag directory. And so we are going to rm-rf ASM DB4 as we don't need it. Now we've done that. As I said, what we're not going to do yet is we're not going to go to, if I, in my grid user, and then cd to this disk group, we'll see we have this ASM DB4. We don't want DB4 and we do not want DB1, we just want DB2. But if I delete it right now because there's a snapshot there, it's not really deleting it. So what we want to do now is let's connect into the controller. and we'll do a fault blown split status for vserver P. That's the vserver. So right now it is still splitting, so there's not a lot I can do. Now if I do a snap show dash volume dash vserver, to what snapshot says that we have. Right now it's because it's still in the middle of a split. Now, as I said, at this point, users should be up and running on both databases. What we're doing now is cleaning up in a way that removes the space we don't need to have existing in the new disk group. We're close to finished. All right, so it is finished. Now what we can do is we want to remove the snapshot because we don't want it to store. But first things first, we can actually go, it's actually going to put a little more work on the system, but not too terribly much. We do want to rm-rf ASM DB4. We do not want it. And we are going to also want the same for ASM DB1, as we're not using it. We're only using DB2. Now, after doing all of this, we may see a growth in the snapshot. Nope, it's only if we tried to overwrite it. So what we want to do now is snap delete dash volume dash snapshot dash vserver. Okay, so now we're ready to define protection for ASM DB2 and back it up. So if we go now to DB2, we want to protect it. So I'm going to assign online backup with archive logs and then click next and continue. It's just important to get a backup. Now that this has been complete, we want to get a backup as soon as we're done. So we're going to go then backup. Now, of course, this could have been done from the command line. This is just showing the graphical way to perform a backup. And we are about finished. What we'll want to see is verify that the backup shows the database in the new location. We can go monitor. Should be just about finished. It's just backing up archive logs. Okay, so once that's complete, what we'll do is we'll go to look at a report so we can see and now since it's completed, let's go look at a report and verify that the database files for that backup. So this most recent backup, ASM DB2, and we see it's pointing now to the clone volume. At this point, you are free to rename the volume. So we can do a volume rename dash, what is it? vServer dash volume dash new name. And if we look at what our previous names are, we can just name it EA ASM Data 2 dash 01. And then we can do a, once that's complete, it returns. And we see the ASM Data 2. And if we were to run another backup and look at the report, we'll verify that it points to the new volume name. We could have, of course, renamed the volume before we ran the initial backup. This first snapshot should actually be pretty quick. So we can do a snap show dash volume dash vServer. And we'll see we have this new snapshot that's been created. And again, it's backing up the archive logs. This shouldn't take as long simply because we haven't made a lot of changes. Let's go ahead and go back to the reporting section. As we see, it's currently running. Monitor real quick to just see where it is. It's completed. So it doesn't update on the fly. Actually still shows that it's running. How funny. Oh, nope, it's done. And so if we select it, it should show us the new volume name. Yep, and there's the new volume name. So we are done.